So you're 60 years old, you've got a pension, and you've got $1 million saved. Congratulations. You're in a great spot as you plan out your retirement. And as we're going to talk about today, you probably have enough money at this point. But we're going to talk about some more advanced planning thoughts and considerations and strategies to make sure you're maximizing it at this point. Because I know you didn't work for the last 30, 40 years to save all this money to just hope that your retirement is going to be as good as it can be. You've probably been maximizing, you've probably been very frugal, you've probably been a diligent saver, you've probably made really good decisions, so why stop now? And that's what we're going to talk about. If that's you, then you're going to love today's episode of Joe Knows Retirement.
Joe knows taxes.
Joe knows the market.
Joe knows Social Security.
Joe knows income planning.
Joe knows pickleball? No.
This is Joe Knows Retirement.
So we work with a lot of people on pension planning. It's one of the specialties that we had. When I first got into the industry, I helped with people who are retired military and also federal employees of how do they plan with those pensions that they have. And typically their pensions are fairly generous, especially if you've been in the military for a long time and maybe you even were retired military and you went to become a federal employee. Now you got double the pensions and you still have Social Security. And so all those considerations are on the table. But you may not even have Social Security if you have a pension because maybe you work for the state, for example, where you did not pay into Social Security and now you just have a big pension. And so regardless of your case, your situation is if you have a pension and if it is a fairly bigger amount, then this episode is really going to strike you. And then obviously if you have $1 million or more saved up is where this video is going to help you. So let's first just start off about the things you need to understand when you have a pension. Remember, your situation is very different than most people. Less than 20% of people have a pension nowadays. Pensions are less common nowadays because people are living longer. And so these pension companies, these employers, they're not wanting to fund a pension for 20, 30 year plus retirement. Back in the day when people only lived a 5, 10 year retirement, pensions were very common. Everyone had pensions. But nowadays, it just doesn't make financial sense. These companies just can't necessarily do it. So if you find yourself with a pension, understand you're in a unique situation, but also you need to seek out specific guidance from someone who specializes in this area. Understand that not all financial planners may understand the impacts of pensions or are used to planning for that. And so we get a lot of people that come to us who have pensions where they say our advisor has never really looked at these types of strategies. It could be a reason why because they just don't see as many pensions and know how the impacts and what that does moving forward. And so here are the things you need to understand as you plan with a pension is one is that you need to understand those impact of those RMDs are going to be more so than most people out there. With most people who don't have a pension, they have what's called that standard deduction. So right now the standard deduction is $29,200. And so if you took out $29,000 from that IRA in retirement, there's no taxes on that is how the current rules work. And so for this RMD, which typically happens at ages either 73 or 75, and this is when the government forces you to take out money from those tax-deferred vehicles, right? If you have $1 million in your IRA right now, or maybe $1 million in your 401k or 403b, well, now you've got to pay taxes on any withdrawals there. But if you don't have a pension, then you could potentially take out a small amount each year and not have to pay taxes on it. And so for someone without a pension, their planning may be a little more simpler. They maybe can not have to worry about this big tax-deferred time bomb as much. Those with $1 million or more here, now they're going to use up that standard deduction. They're going to start to force Social Security to become taxable. So for them, they need to really worry about this just as much as someone who has a pension. But back to you all, with those pensions, if your pension's $29,000 or more, well, you don't get to use up any of that standard deduction with these investment distributions from these required minimum distributions. And so if that's you, those pulling out that money is only going to be at a higher tax bracket. And so what we tell people with pensions is that you're always going to find yourself in a higher tax bracket. And typically what we see is that with someone with a pension, while they're working, they may be at a pretty decent income, but in retirement, when it's their pension plus a Social Security plus investment withdrawals, they're probably either going to be in the same tax bracket or a higher tax bracket in retirement. And so for you, the considerations, the planning is going to be different. You've heard the story before. You'll be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. Well, that may be true for some people, but for those with pensions, we typically don't see it very often, especially those who have saved a diligent amount and have a fairly large pension, that's going to force your income to be very high in the future. And so that's the one consideration, is calculate what that RMD is going to be. If you have $1 million in your 401k and you're 60 years old, your RMD is going to be massive by the time you reach that age 75 time frame, right? So if you're born in 1960 or after, your RMD age is 75. If you're born in any other age, it's age 73. And so you have to calculate where you're at. But in that instance, if your RMD, let's say over a 15-year period, it's not outside the realm of possibility for your money to double. I mean, if you just get a 6% rate of return on that $1 million, in 12 years it will double, considering that you take no withdrawals. And so it's not going to be outside the realm of possibility that $1 million you have saved up is now $2 million, and your RMD at that point is going to be around 4% that you're required to take out. You're going to have to take out $80,000 on top of a pension. Maybe your pension's $60,000 a year. And then also your Social Security. And when you factor all that in, I mean, you're sitting at $200,000 or $150,000 a year pretty quickly. And now you're going to find yourself in higher brackets, but you're also going to force yourself into other considerations that I'm going to talk about here as well. And so we need to find ways to reduce those RMDs. We're going to talk about a few strategies throughout this video of how you can reduce those RMDs. But for people with pensions, the RMDs is what triggers it all. And you got to understand that RMDs increase over time. So by the time you're age 90, you're going to be required to take out about 8 or 9% from your investments. And if your investments continue to grow, which we expect, now the amount you have to withdraw, maybe it's not $80,000 now, maybe it's $100,000, maybe it's $120,000. That can really grow and double over time. And so that's why we want to start doing tax planning strategies now, to maybe not have all your money in tax deferred. Maybe we can move some over to Roth or tax free. So now we're not forced to take out as much money at that later point. And the other consideration here is, if you have a bigger pension, you have Social Security, do you even need the money from your investments? Do you want to be forced to take that money out? I mean, it's typically not a good thing when the government forces you to do something. And what we see with people with pension is like, look, on my pension, Social Security, I'm good to go. I don't need any more money. I've got all my paychecks, even paychecks, the extra things I want to do are covered. And so if that's you, well, maybe keeping it how it is may not be the best option, which is something we'll also talk about throughout today's video. So that's the consideration with required minimum distributions. The next thing we have to understand is how all this stuff plays together. And understand that high pension, high Social Security, high investments can lead to us paying more total taxes. Now, when I talk about total taxes, I'm not just talking about federal income taxes. I'm talking about state taxes. I'm talking about capital gains. I'm talking about taxes on your Social Security. I'm talking about net investment income. I'm talking about any other tax that could be associated with your situation. Especially, these taxes can go up the higher your income is. The more you can trigger more of these things like Medicare premium increases, right? You could force yourself to pay more for healthcare and retirement because you're forcing your income higher. So let's talk through each of these ones that we're seeing be big considerations with this 60-year-old with $1 million and a pension. The one is Social Security tax. I mean, you're probably going to force yourself into that, what we call the Social Security tax torpedo. And this is where you could force up to 85% of your Social Security to become taxable. Now, don't get too scared. It's not an 85% tax rate. It means that if you have $100,000 in Social Security income, $85,000 will be counted towards your federal income tax bracket, which could then force capital gains to be higher, could force you into higher Medicare tiers, and it's going to force your income higher. And so with a lot of our clients, we try to avoid what we call the Social Security tax torpedo. I've done another video on this, and this is where you could pay a 40 to 50% tax on this withdrawal. So, I mean, we talk about a client where they took out $10,000. They wanted to take out $10,000 from their IRA, and if they would have done so, it would have put them over that torpedo where they'd have to pay almost a 50% tax. And so if that was the case, they would keep $5,000, Uncle Sam would get $5,000. In that instance, that may not be the right decision. Maybe we can take out $10,000 from a Roth and avoid that 50% tax rate, because then we're not forcing Social Security to be fully taxable. We're only forcing to be partially taxable. So again, understand how all this plays together. With pensions, though, you're finding yourself closer to that torpedo, and that needs to be a consideration as you do your planning. And so maybe if we can lower your RMDs, maybe we can find yourself out of that torpedo, avoid that 40 to 50% tax rate. Even though you may be in the 12% bracket, you're going to be forcing that Social Security tax that may not need to be done. So that's one consideration. And we've got many softwares, charts, reports to show how all that works with the clients that we work with. So if you're working with an advisor, they should be showing you that every year to make sure you're not missing that. And then the other thing to understand is Medicare premiums. We just talked about that. Again, the way Medicare premiums work is that the higher your income is, the more you're going to have to pay for health insurance. Now, in my opinion, I don't think this is very fair because it penalizes those who have been diligent saver. It penalizes those who have been that have pensions. And the reason why, as we've talked about earlier, is your income is going to force yourself higher. And so maybe someone without a pension, maybe someone who hasn't done as well saving, they may find themselves paying the lowest cost for their Medicare throughout their retirement. But you, because you did the right things, because you did what you were told, now you're forced to pay double, triple the amount for Medicare, but you get the same coverage. That's why I don't think it's fair. And so again, if we don't have as much in tax deferred, then maybe we can lower this. Maybe we can do some charitable strategies in retirement to lower that required minimum distribution, which we'll talk about. So that's a big one that we see with people with pension, that they're always worried about what's called IRMA, right? Those Medicare premiums increasing on Part B and D. The good news is that you're 60 years old, you got the time to plan. You got the time to start planning now to make sure you can take advantage of it. So the other consideration, though, if you're 60 years old and you have a pension, you're probably retired, I'd imagine. If you're taking that pension at this point, maybe you're still working, and if so, this may not be as much of a concern, but you have to worry about how you're going to get health insurance from 60 to 65. Maybe your company is going to just cover you throughout your till 65 until you get on Medicare, but maybe not. And if not, then you may have to get outside health insurance. And so where a lot of people look is the Affordable Care Act, which could be good coverage, but understand that's going to be dependent on your income. And if you have a pension, you're going to force your income higher, and you may force yourself to pay the highest amount for an Affordable Care Act policy. Whereas other folks, they may be left with paying almost nothing for their health insurance in retirement because they have no income from 60 to 65 because they don't have a pension that's forcing their income higher. So I know I'm making it sound like a pension's negative, but by any means that is not the case. I've done another video that's just a short 2-minute video that talks about the power of a pension and how valuable it is in your retirement. So by no means during this video should you feel sorry for yourself for having a pension. The only idea I'm trying to get across is that your planning is more sophisticated, it's more purposeful if you do have a pension. So I may be trying to scare you a little bit to motivate you to do the planning, but I'm not trying to scare you to say that you got a worse situation or that you're in a bad place. So just make sure we understand where we're coming from here, and make sure you feel good about your hard work over these years. And the other consideration here is just understand that you're probably not going to be able to use up that standard deduction like we talked about earlier because you're always in a higher tax bracket. So that's when we can start to look at some strategies now to start reducing things, but do it now while we still got time on our side before those required minimum distributions hit you. And that's what we're going to start talking about now, is what can we do about this big tax time bomb we have here with all this $1 million in tax deferred. But if you're 60, you're getting ahead of it. Now you can be proactive and start doing tax strategies. And so we're going to talk about a strategy that we're seeing a lot of our clients use with pensions, and this is simply called a Roth conversion. And if you haven't heard of this one or you haven't been doing this, I'd highly recommend writing this down. And again, if you're 60 years old with a pension $1 million, I can't guarantee that you should do this because I don't want to lose my job and I don't know your specific situation. But I can tell you that most people in this situation that we're talking about in this video are doing Roth conversions. And the reason why is because they're not going to find themselves in a lower tax bracket. So let's take that tax deferred now and let's move it to tax free now and pay our taxes now. And so again, if we move it from tax deferred to tax free, we do have to pay taxes, but we do have to understand that tax rates are lower right now. And if you have a pension, you may never see lower tax brackets again in your retirement, considering that tax rates are going up in 2026. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. President Trump enacted that in 2017. We've only got a limited time before that goes away. But also we have to understand, what are tax rates going to be moving forward? I mean, I haven't met too many people who think tax rates are going to go down. And I haven't met too many people with a pension that think their income is going to go down. Yeah, that pension could go away, but as we know, that typically doesn't happen. And so with that being the case, what do we want to do? Do we just want to wait in the future and see what happens and hope tax rates will go down? Or do we want to start paying our taxes now at lower rates? And so ultimately up to you, but also with a Roth conversion, there's a lot of other tax planning strategies that we're going to talk about that may be able to benefit you with that pension. And so one of those is to make sure that we have a lower R&D. So if we have $1 million in our tax deferred investment, let's just say we converted half of that. And you shouldn't do this all in 1 year. It's typically what we tell people. We've done some other videos on that. You typically want to do Roth conversions over a period of time. And since you are age 60, you're going to have a window of opportunity from 60 to 73, 75, where you can Roth convert without having to take out that R&D. And so you want to get ahead of it so you can lower that R&D is what we're getting to. Another consideration for you is if you do get Social Security on top of your pension, is maybe you should defer your Social Security to 70. And I'm not making this a hard, fast rule that you should do this, because we don't always recommend this. But if you do defer till 70, when you do get to 70, now your Social Security will be nearly double because you've got all the increases over the years. But also, you no longer have an income from 60 to 70, which allows you to do more of these Roth conversions at lower tax brackets. Because if you take your Social Security at 62, well, now you're only going to have 2 years of lower income situations. And then at 62, you're going to have your pension and Social Security. And then if you try to do Roth conversions at that time, it can still work. But now you're not going to be able to utilize those lower brackets as much. So again, it's just a consideration for you. If you're in poor health and you don't expect to live a long time, then go ahead and take it at 62 is typically what we recommend. But just understand the correlation of how this all plays together. And if waiting until 70 gets you not only nearly double the amount of Social Security, but it also saves you X amount in taxes, does it make sense to wait? Could it even add more alpha? And typically the break even is around age 80-ish of when taking it at 70 starts to beat out taking it at 62. Because remember, you go 8 years without payment, so you do have to factor in that. So if you've got some longevity, going to 80, getting the extra amount, but also the tax savings could be beneficial for you. So again, not a recommendation, just something that you should really calculate and consider as you plan out that retirement. And so other reasons why Roth conversions can be so helpful for you is to help you back down off that Social Security tax torpedo we talked about. Remember, if you're RMD, maybe you don't have $1 million now, but maybe you have $500,000. Now your RMD is only going to be about $20,000 versus $40,000, right? And as we know, that $1 million is probably going to grow to $2 million at that time, as we did the calculations earlier. So it could be an $80,000 conversion. But if we can get ahead of it now, well, then now we can lower that RMD. Now we can give ourselves more control as we plan out retirement. Remember, if all of our money is in tax deferred and we need $50,000, or we're forced to take out $50,000, we have no say at what tax bracket we're going to pay. The tax code's written in pencil, and we don't have that pencil. And so we're forced to take that money out at whatever tax rates are going to be, and we have no plan of how we can take that out. So if we have more in tax-free, now we need $50,000. Now we can decide which bucket it comes out to, and that's going to control our income moving forward. So I'd rather have control on the taxes I pay than Uncle Sam, and so that's why that balance could make sense there. And the other reason why that Roth conversion can make sense, again, not only lowering the RMD is good for Social Security taxes, but also for Medicare premium tiers, as we talked about. If we're not having to have an RMD that's as big, now we're not going to force ourselves to pay more in healthcare. So again, 60 years old, what you have to look out for is age 63. And you're probably wondering, why do I need to be aware of 63 for Medicare? Well, yes, you don't have to get it until you're 65. And if you're still working, you could defer it even longer. But that's when your age 65 benefit starts to get calculated, is at age 63. So if you're 63 and you did a $300,000 Roth conversion, well, you're going to force yourself at 65 to pay a lot more in Medicare premiums. And so again, that's why that age 60 to 63 timeline, the next 3 years, not only are the next 2 years going to be lower tax brackets, but also we don't have any Medicare premium tiers we need to worry about, which is why these Roth conversions can make a lot of sense during these 2 years, especially no Social Security potentially as well. And so you really want to make sure you're proactive, and we got to get this done before the end of the year, because this is done December 31st, our last day to get Roth conversions done for the year of 2024. And this is why this planning is going to be important for you. The other thing that many people don't think about when it comes to these Roth conversions as well is it can also help you with capital gains. So capital gains have a 0% tax bracket, and that goes up to about $90,000 if you're married filing jointly. And so if your pension, your Social Security, allows you to fall under that, well, maybe your RMDs are going to force you over that. And so again, if we can start to convert more money now, maybe we can start to sell off our capital gains investments some point in the future at that 0% bracket. And so again, just seeing how all this plays together, that's the most important thing we need to understand. Now, the other reason why Roth conversions can make sense for pensions, not only for all the other reasons we mentioned, which would benefit you, but let's also talk about how it could benefit others. And so if you have goals of leaving money behind to maybe your kids or maybe your spouse, that's where Roth conversions, in my mind, can even make more sense. And the reason why is because your kids specifically now have to take out your IRA over a 10-year period. And so if this tax-deferred investment keeps growing, this $1 million keeps growing, by the time you pass away, it may have doubled, it may have tripled, and your kids are going to be left with a huge tax burden. And if they have to take that over 10 years, that's probably going to bump their taxes up at that time, probably when they're making a higher income, and probably at unknown tax rates, as we talked about earlier. And so you may not be passing on as much wealth as you plan to do because of that increased time that they now have to take it out. And so maybe the consideration is that if we leave them the Roth, well, there is no RMD during your lifetime. And so you're not required to take out money from a Roth. And so you could let that thing continue to compound and grow over time and never be forced to take that money out. Because some people we see, they want to take the money out. Like we talked about, those with pensions may not need all that money. They want to take the money out and they want to reinvest it. Well, if we reinvest it at a time when we don't have income, we can't necessarily reinvest it into a Roth, for example. We'd have to reinvest it into a non-retirement account, which is going to be pay taxes at capital gains rate, which is either going to be about 15, 20%, unless we find ourselves in that 0% tax bracket. And so you're going to be paying an additional 15% tax on this potentially, which means that your tax bill is only going to continue to rise as you age. Versus if we have it in the Roth, well, now it's going to grow tax-free. We're never going to have to worry about that 15% tax, and we're never going to have to take it out. And so not only is more likely to go to the kids, but also they can have a pro tip, I call it, where they leave this money in that Roth IRA during that 10-year period. Because if it's in a Roth, they still have to take it out in 10 years. But current rule state, and this could change, so you want to be aware of this, they could wait until that 10th year to pull that Roth out. So not only are you getting tax-free growth during your lifetime, you're also getting tax-free growth for another 10 plus years, and then your kids have to take it out, and then they could invest it in a non-retirement account or be used for whatever they need to. And you're going to save a lot of money from that compounding tax-free growth over the years. And so that's why I'm a big fan of tax-free, of Roth conversions for that tax-free benefit for those who want to leave generational wealth or leave money behind to their kids in the most efficient way. And in my opinion, that's a great way to do it. And we actually have a calculator that shows how much of an impact that can be, and it can lead to hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes less paid just by having that type of plan in place. And the other consideration here is for your spouse. So there's something called the widow's penalty. And so this is something you're going to have to ask yourself in regards to your pension. Is it have a 100% survivor option on it? Is it 50%? Is it your spouse gets nothing? And let's just say they get 100% of your pension. Okay, so they have the same amount of income. They are going to lose one of the Social Security. So when one spouse passes, you keep the higher of the two. And so with those two things, you're going to be forced with still a high income, not as high as you were when you're living because we lost the Social Security, but what happens to the tax brackets? Well, the tax brackets go from married filing jointly to single, and now you're left with paying more in taxes. And so we also have done videos on what we call the widow's penalty here if you'd like to get more information on that. But if you have a pension, you're going to force your spouse, if they have a 100% survivor or some sort of survivor, to have a higher income, pay a higher tax rate, and if you have RMDs on top of it for the spouse that we've been talking about, now they're going to pay a ton of money in taxes and probably more than what you could just pay right now if you just converted it to a Roth. And so that's typically where we want to leave the spouse with more tax-free investments so that they're not forced to pay a higher tax rate on that money with those single brackets. And so again, if your goal is to leave a legacy to a spouse, kids, that's where the Roth can really make sense. And again, those compounding growth even for that spouse can make a lot of sense. And if this is the male watching the video, typically females live longer. So if you're watching this together, make sure that you're planning for your spouse and also be aware of any age gaps that you may see. We work with some people who may be 5-10 years older, and not only that, but you have to look at all the demographics. What's the health of each spouse to make that decision of what that looks like. But bigger gaps, bigger health problems, differences, then that's where this type of planning can really make even more sense, right? If you both pass away the same year, the widow's penalty is not really a factor. It's where one spouse predeceases very early. Now you've got your entire retirement paying at single brackets versus married filing jointly. And so since we don't know what the future holds, this is why I like being proactive and planning for this before that type of time happens. So those are just some of the types of strategies, but also if your goal is to leave money to kids, maybe a consideration you have, if you have all your income covered from this pension, maybe you start giving now to the kids. Maybe you start to give them some money while they're working so they can max out their retirement amount, max out their Roth IRA, max out their Roth 401k, while they're working, while they can benefit from that. So that could be a strategy for you. And also get that money out of your estate, right? You never know how low state tax limits can go. You never know about anything Medicaid, situations where it's forcing you to pay down your assets. And so that's why, that could be a consideration. But you have to, want to obviously do that to benefit from that. And obviously, giving while you're living, so you know where it's going, could be more valuable from people versus just leaving all your money behind when that day comes. And speaking of giving money, let's talk about some charitable strategies here real quick. And so, if you're 60 years old, there's two strategies I want you to be aware of. And one is something you can start doing now, and the other is you can't do it until the future, but it's important to understand so you can start planning for that. So the first one was called a donor advised fund. And this is where you could give a chunk of money now to get a higher tax deduction. And so it's kind of like bunching charitable deductions into 1 year. So now we know that standard deduction is so high, most people take that standard deduction, 90% of people, and not as many people itemize. And so if you charitable give, let's say $10,000 a year, you may not see any benefit there because you may not be able to get over that high standard deduction. And so your charitable giving, it's not wasted. I'm sure it's making an impact, but from a tax standpoint, it's wasted. So what we do with our clients in that point, let's say they're 60 years old, and let's say they have $100,000 in a stock in a non-qualified account. Well, we're going to give that $100,000 stock that's maybe seen a lot of gain over the years. If they're not planning on using it over the next 10 years, we're going to put it in a donor advised fund, and we're going to get a $100,000 itemized deduction now, then state and local on top of it, and any other itemized deductions you may have. And we're going to get a huge tax deduction now to offset some of these Roth conversions we're going to do. And that's where we're going to start to layer tax strategies on top of each other and start to get more of this stuff moving and getting it sped up is kind of the idea, and just not leaving any money on the table. And then in that donor advised fund, you would just give $10,000 a year from there instead of your pocket. And so you'd have more of a cash flow. And then, over that 10-year period, you wouldn't get any tax benefits. You got it all up front. But then you just give it to until age 70. And so you're probably wondering, why, Joe, why would we stop at 70? I'm planning to give them the rest of my life, Well, that's where the qualified charitable distribution comes in, is age 70 and a half. And so at 70 and a half is when you can start giving from your IRA to a charity tax-free. And that's what we typically want to see at that point. And so we want to see the donor advice done until 70 and a half. So give as much money as you're expecting to give till that point. And then at 70 and a half, then you give from your IRAs to the charity. So why is this impactful for people with pensions? Is because, remember, your income is going to be higher. This is a way you can reduce the RMD. So maybe, Roth conversion is one way. Qualified charitable distribution is another way that you could lower that required minimum distribution and, save money on taxes while you do the giving that you've been planning for. So both of those strategies can allow you to really control your income in retirement to get it to where you want to, so you can have less of your tax, less of your Social Security tax come into play, less Medicare premiums, all of those things that we've discussed in today's video. And so at the end of the day, the last thing I want to leave you with is, if you have a pension, hope this was extremely valuable, but also understand that enjoy your retirement. You've done well. You've saved enough money. You've got a great income source with that pension that's going to be there for the rest of your life. You may have Social Security on top of that. You probably aren't going to need more money throughout your retirement. You're just going to need to make sure you're making the right decisions from a planning standpoint, avoid mistakes, do some of the things we talked about today, but you're probably going to have to figure out a way to spend more money. That's typically what we're telling our clients with pensions, because if they don't, this money's going to keep growing and growing and growing, and they're not going to be able to enjoy it. And so if your goal is to leave money behind or to give to charities, maybe that is a fine thing to not spend it all. But it's going to be hard for you to spend your pension, your Social Security, and these investment withdrawals in retirement, is what we see for most of these Midwestern millionaires, is what we call them, because they're typically frugal. They're better savers and they're spenders at this point in their lives. So if that's you, make sure you're planning the right way. And if you're looking for more specific pension planning, we do have more videos that you can check out on this topic. And we also specialize in pension planning, so you're more than welcome to schedule time with our team to see if we can help you plan that retirement that you've been saving for. So again, just make sure you're working with an advisor team who knows how to handle the pensions and knows how to work these types of strategies together, because they are going to be more important for you with that income being higher. So we'll see you on the next video. I hope you enjoyed it, and get planning with those pensions.